one of my clients had a busted license plate light. I mean, it wasn't even a tail light, and he got pulled over, in my opinion, for driving while brown. Um, and even though he had three U.S. citizen kids, there was nothing I can do to keep him here because the laws were so bad. And that's just a very typical story.
Welcome to Shoresides, where we explore the coastal North Carolina region's past, present, and future to promote community resilience. I'm Nicholas Magrino. With the re-election of President-elect Donald Trump for a second term, Americans now have to face the reality of the federal government initiating a mass deportation of undocumented immigrants.
But we're starting with the criminals, and we gotta do it. And then we're starting with others, and we're gonna see how it goes.
Once he returns to office in January, North Carolina may well be ground zero for what this large-scale deportation effort will look like. In the days after Trump was announced to have won the election, stock for GEO Group, a private prison company, doubled in value. North Carolina is host to one of GEO's main offices in the Southeast, and the Rivers Correctional Facility near the border with Virginia.
When it comes to the immigration detention system, that's where the private prison companies and primarily GEO and Core Civic with management training systems or management training corporation to a lesser degree in the immigration detention. And I think GEO in particular has been a heavy backer of Donald Trump. They've donated a lot of money to his campaign. George Zoley, their president of GEO here in Boca Raton, he hosts fundraisers for Trump and other Republican candidates.
That was Paul Wright, an editor for Prison Legal News. His publication has been reporting on prisons since 1990. According to him, GEO has deep ties to Trump and his allies.
I think that everyone, including me, thinks they're going to be handsomely rewarded for their payoffs and their contributions to Trump and company, because I think in the week after the election, GEO stock went up like 45% and Core Civics went up around 30% or so. So I think everyone's expecting that if Trump follows through or tries to follow through on his campaign promises of mass deportations and rounding up immigrants in that, I think everyone is figuring probably correctly that the private prison companies stand to benefit financially in large part because A, they have the capacity to cage a lot of people, and B, they can probably ramp up and build a lot more cages fairly quickly if they're being paid to do so. And it's got the potential to just be a boondoggle of government funding to do this.
The private prison industry has existed in some form since the 1980s. According to Wright, these prisons make money by using less resources than the government pays them for when they give them contracts.
A real simple model is you get as much money as you can out of the government, and then you provide as little services as possible. And that's your profit margin. Every audit and analysis that's been done of private prison companies show that basically they don't really provide they do provide services for less money than the government does. The taxpayers, however, never realize any profit or show any benefit from this because that becomes the company's profit margin. And one of the big things to understand is that the cost of running a prison, around 85% of the cost of running a prison or detention facility is spent on staffing costs. It's salaries. That's where the money goes. And that's where they save money.
By hiring less people, they pay less in salaries, which means more money is going into the corporate side of the company. And this deliberate understaffing has a real cost.
Every analysis, after-action report, audit, or whatever that's been done of private prison companies, especially after there's been major disturbances, escapes, murders, you name it, usually shows that understaffing is one of the leading causes of it. And this is like one of the things that has come up in case after case after case around the country where they do audits of these private prison companies. And for example, the contract will call, just to use as an example, it'll call for, okay, you're supposed to have 200 full-time employee positions staffed at this prison 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And instead of the 200, they might have 75 vacancies. So there's actually only 125 people employed on every shift when there's supposed to be 200 there. But basically, by not filling the positions and being paid for it, that's their profit margin. So that's where they make the bulk of their profits, is by short staffing the facilities. And what's amazing is that in a lot of states, they've been dinged for this, they've been caught, and sometimes their contracts even call for penalties, and then either the government refuses to enforce the penalties, or in other cases, they forgive them.
This relationship has been relatively stable over the past few decades, regardless of if a Democrat or a Republican is occupying the White House. According to data from July 2023, about 90% of people detained by ICE are held in private prisons. What Trump's re-election signals to the industry is that, for prisons who are paid by the inmate, a windfall of profits is coming. According to Martin Rosenbluth, an immigration defense lawyer, some of the people who are targeted by ICE for detainment are people who have been involved in their communities for years.
Most of my clients, have been here. Well, most of my clients for people who have been here. I also do a lot of asylum cases for recent arrivals. But I mean, these are people who, have been here 10 years or more. Most of them have U.S. citizen kids. They work in construction, restaurants, auto mechanics, yard work, stuff like that. They're very well established, and so they're being deported or incarcerated doesn't just affect them; it affects other people in the community.
It's most common for undocumented immigrants to be discovered when they are arrested for a minor offense.
A lot of people, get picked up on like routine traffic stops, and the police will like run their IDs, or they'll bring them into the sheriff's office and fingerprint them, and then ICE automatically gets a copy of the fingerprint and can decide whether to come. A lot of people don't have identification, and that's used as grounds to arrest them and call ICE. A lot of it is random bad luck. I mean, occasionally you'll get someone who has a prior removal order, and their name will come up in some system and they'll come and arrest them. But most of my clients, they just were they got a speeding ticket, they paid the bond, and as soon as they walk out of the courthouse, ICE is waiting for them.
One notable change going into the second Trump administration is an increase in ICE workplace raids. Under Trump's first presidency, the amount of ICE raids per year doubled compared to the Obama and Bush administrations.
This is one of the things that Trump is threatening. But basically, ICE says that they got a tip, and they'll come to a workplace and they'll start asking people for their IDs. They'll ask the employer to see their records, to see whether or not these people have valid work permits. And anyone who either, it doesn't have a work permit on them, or ICE can't find it in the workplace's computer, they'll arrest them and take them in.
Rosenbluth feels that another increase in the frequency of raids will put a strain on state and federal resources.
I work near the Stewart Detention Center, which is the largest detention center east of the Mississippi, and it's always at capacity. So, I mean, unless they're going to take people from the workplace directly to the border, that's going to be a problem. And I mean, they can't even take everyone to the border because not everybody's Mexican. And the Mexican government is, as far as I've heard up until now, is not just going to take anyone that Trump drops at the border.
The South is fertile ground for immigration detention. From the perspective of private prisons, facilities from companies like Geo are overwhelmingly more present in the South.
Yeah, I think that part of the big thing is if you look at where they're at, generally speaking, they're all south of the Mason-Dixon line. They're all in so-called right-to-work states where they don't have to use a union workforce.
Rosenbluth also says that North Carolina specifically plays a role in developing a relationship between the federal government's immigration priorities and local law enforcement.
North Carolina, actually, in particular, was used as a training ground, testing ground for all of these partnerships between local law enforcement and ICE. So, I mean, we had quote unquote secure communities in all 100 counties before most states even had one. So, yeah, I mean, the South has definitely been a focal point for um, uh, ICE enforcement.
While what the government says about immigrants has changed from administration to administration, both Wright and Rosenbluth feel that not a lot changes in what the federal government actually does to immigrants over time.
Well, look, I mean, I practiced under Bush. I practiced under Obama. I practiced under Trump. I practiced under Biden. And although the rhetoric is very, very different, the reality on the ground, what goes on in the immigration court, for me, really hasn't changed all that much.
And I say this as someone who's been doing this work for going on 35 years now. So, I think I've got a little bit of perspective. And I think anyone that says that somehow things change based on the presidential administration, I think that either hopelessly optimistic at best or outright lying at worst. So, it doesn't really change that much. It doesn't change that much for the people experiencing it.
What does change, though, is the national culture surrounding immigrants. It's how people feel about them and what people may do if they know one or know someone they think looks like one.
The increase in rhetoric is certainly very scary. I mean, I think that's going to lead to a lot of racial profiling. I think it's going to mean that local law enforcement will even take a more aggressive role. I think there's going to be a lot more. The only word I can really think of is vigilante action. Um, in local communities. And I don't mean people are going to go around, on horses with ropes and rounding people up. Um, but no, I mean, like pressure on local schools, for example, to make people show proof of citizenship, even though the law on this is crystal clear. They have to provide school. Um, I think you're going to see an increase in other services like hospitals requiring people to show proof of citizenship or at least legal status, right, in order to get access to services. And there's going to be a lot of confusion. A lot of people are going to, you know, report their neighbors. A lot of people are going to report their coworkers. A lot of people are, just random individuals they come across. They're going to report them.
Wright feels that while the private prison industry will see a lot of short-term gains as Trump takes office, their profits can burn out as time goes on.
Well, one of the things I think is interesting is that under the first Trump administration, the stock prices of both CoreCivic and Geo tanked. And I think that one of the things is once they became enmeshed in the family separation stuff, I mean, as bad as their public image is, it got worse. And I think I mentioned I'm fluent in Spanish. And when Trump was in office with his family separation thing going, that got a lot of international media attention. And I would say that for most of the Trump administration, I don't think a week went by that I was not doing an interview on Spanish language television about immigration detention or human rights involving private prisons and Trump and things like that.
What Wright and Rosenbluth can both agree on is that Americans will be talking more about immigration, and that will in itself create opposition and resistance to a system that has mostly worked unopposed.
I think that in a lot of respects, both the policies and the behaviors are so toxic that the reality is right now, immigration detention in private prisons were terrible under Biden. They were terrible under Obama. They were terrible under Clinton, but they got very little opposition. Under Trump, they got a lot of opposition. So I think the silver lining is I think that the even when everything is the same, if it's an administration you don't like doing it, it pulls up a little more resistance. It pulls up a little more criticism. It pulls up a little bit more support for the people that are doing it.
When Trump got elected, um, about month or two afterwards, I started getting phone calls from journalists saying, what's changed under Trump? And I said, you called me. No, because under Obama, everybody thought that everything was hunky dory and that Obama was pro immigrant and that nothing bad was happening. But once Trump got elected, people, they perked up. They're like, oh, maybe we need to pay attention to this. So, I mean, on the level of being able to convince people that change is needed, I think we'll definitely be seeing that.
From Shoresides, this is Nicholas Magrino. Learn more about Shoresides at shoresides.org. Thanks for listening.